right, we're coming up now.
The Smooth Breakfast presents the headlines, the stories, the news. In-depth analysis on national current affairs. Freshly pressed.
Mike's up, studio's live.
You're doing social media. Interesting.
Mike's up.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for staying tuned here on Smooth 98.1. It's time for Freshly Pressed 981, where we analyze the news stories for today. I'm Ayo Myrese.
And I am Valentine Oko. Good morning.
Joining us for the conversation this morning, we have Bolaon. Good morning, Bolaon.
Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Valentine.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lagos.
Bolaon, thanks for coming. Bolaon is at Mr. G Quest on Twitter. We also have Devo Okorie.
Good morning, Lagos. Cool. Say no to taking away of our freedom of speech.
All right. You can find Devo at Devo Okorie on Twitter and monitor if he's speaking or mistweeting on Twitter. But let's know what you think about the stories this morning. You can send in your conversation or your comments to WhatsApp 0809-444-0981.
And on Twitter at Smooth91FM, the hashtag is Freshlypressed981, and we're streaming live on YouTube. So join us on YouTube as you say hello to us and react to the stories.
Okay, so let's start with our first one here. Going to Devo's earlier greeting, it's in reaction to this story from the Guardian newspaper. Nigerian government to regulate social media. But Bola, I'd like you to take on this story. So the Nigerian government is making plans to regulate the use of social media, according to Nigeria's Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed, who said this yesterday in Abuja. Now, it's in contradiction, Balaam, to the statement made or credited to the Vice President, I believe was last week when he was giving a speech at the United Arab Emirates Embassy in Abuja, where he said that he doesn't think that government regulation is necessarily the way to go, that we should self-regulate when it comes to statements on social media. What do you make of this story, please?
Well, I mean, this story broke yesterday. The Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed, disclosed this yesterday, saying that the government is planning to regulate social media and other media platforms too, such as radio. And that the reason for it is that, of course, the government will not fold its arms and then allow people to make unguarded statements that could bring the country on fire, or set the country on fire, or bring a lot of social unrest or civil unrest in the society. This has been long coming. We've had this quite a few months or years back now, and then there's been a back and forth disagreement amongst the citizens and the people. Even the government officials, just as you mentioned, the Vice President is also saying that he doesn't believe that we should regulate social media and that people should self-regulate themselves. It's understandable that, of course, we have to be careful what we air out on social media and other platforms. We have the responsibility to make sure that whatever information that we're disseminating out on social media should be responsible piece of information. We should be accountable for what we are also disseminating as individuals. However, one must be very cautious to note that there's a very thin line in this current administration and government between what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. A classic example is the situation that we're witnessing at the moment with Shuri.
Yes.
And the statement that was made, which is a revolution. That was just a basic statement that was made,
Well, that
but
you
it has
might
been
consider
classified.
it a basic statement, but a number of, it's been debated. The
It
debate has
is
been ongoing as to
this
is it just a statement?
absolutely,
Was
but
he
you
inciting-
really cannot get a general consensus to agree that it is insightful and is inappropriate to have made. I mean, when you have situations of that nature, you should have the courts decide all of this. And so far, the court has asked that the gentleman should be released, and the government
Yes.
has not
On bail,
released
yeah.
him. So it is a scary situation that we find ourselves in. I mean, we need to remember that one of the tenets of democracy is the freedom of expression,
Absolutely.
the freedom of speech. Once you take that out from people, then we are living in a
Gestapo, militarized.
militarized
All right.
country.
Thank you. And that's what St. Fadro seems to be saying here. He says, why does the government want to subject the citizens to a military rule? If the government does what's right, we won't get inciting messages.
MI says, wow, set on fire. Interesting choice of words. I'm curious to know what the metrics that will be used, that will be deployed. Vice President says one thing, the minister says another. Are they both part of the same government? The more we look at this long rope, the more it looks like a snake. A cool, unguarded comments. MI from Akala.
All right, thanks, MI. Again, and some people also ask the question, how will you regulate comments from abroad? So for Nigerians who are not living here, how will you regulate that? But let's watch and see what the government conclude. We move on to our next story. Devol, please withdraw terrorism charges against lawyer detained for criticizing governor. Now, the governor in question is the Cross River Governor, Ben Ayade, and it's not as if they've withdrawn completely. They're just moving it to another jurisdiction. They are taking it to Abuja, where they say they have more. That's where the jurisdiction for that is. But tell us what this young man, this young lawyer who is Joseph Odok, what he's been accused of doing.
Okay, this is the example that Bolahan was just relating to, and this is why we need to protect our freedom of speech. Say no to abridged freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is an entitlement world over to ensure that people are able to associate freely, discuss with themselves, communicate, agree and disagree, and at the same time hold your leadership or whichever body that is informed accountable. It serves a purpose. However, this story is an example of how the freedom of speech can be barred and abused. In this case here, what you have is a known lawyer in Cross River, that's Joseph Odok, who had been a known critic of the Cross River Governor Ben Ayade, Dr. Ben Ayade. Okay, now the police filed a motion against him on 2 counts, one on terrorism, the other on cybercrime. Okay, in September, where he was arrested in Abuja and brought down to Calabar. Okay, now currently the case has been transferred to Abuja because the Abuja federal what do you call it, the charges that were given to him, the prosecution counsel did say that they were withdrawing the charges, that it would be transferred to Abuja, where the police headquarters, that's police HQ, would be given a thorough investigation, of which the judge has questioned why and what gave them the powers. So there we see some gymnastics taking place. Secondly, on the second charge of cybercrime, he was accused of calling the chief of staff of the governor a cultist. Let me quickly just break that down. Now, the prosecution counsel did state that these charges were furious, they were phantom, okay, and that they were politically motivated. What does he mean by that? First of all, why was he called a terrorist? Because they felt that he incited individuals and citizens through some of his posts. What were these posts? And we're going to go through a few of them. Secondly, the issue of cybercrime, okay? It's not cybercrime when you call someone names, when you call someone a cultist. The law that protects that is slander and libel, okay?
Libel, yes.
Now, in this case, this is libel simply because it was written down somewhere.
Yes.
So if whoever is offended, which is either in the presence of the chief of staff or whoever who takes up the case, you can sue for libel, but this does not become cybercrime.
Yes.
Secondly, on the case of terrorism, what was he writing? He was only critical of the governor's positions. One, he called the governor a joker. He said Ayade keeps getting it wrong with lofty projects, that why talk of a spaghetti flyover when you have not maintained a single road? Or a man that cannot complete a single road is talking of a super highway, because there have been lots of, let's call them miraculous large projects that have been coming out from the Cross River State government.
Yeah.
Now, the truth is this: is this the basis of slamming terrorism on an individual? Now, this is high abuse. This is very simple to the plain eye. Two, this same government has also held down another critic that was in the name of Agba Jalingo, which most people are aware or don't know, who was also critical of the government and accused the government of diverting about 500 million through one of the micro finance projects. Till date, he's still behind bars. Now, there's an optics here that's not looking right. Yeah. One, and this is the part that disappoints me. This is one of the youngest governors, okay?
Yes.
So it doesn't speak well of the youth. Two, he's educated, he's a doctor. So you're having a full educated person in governance, and he's among the opposition, where you would expect that in a bid to shift government from the current administration, you would see better governance. However, what we're seeing is high abuse of power, and these are the things that we need to be careful about, because as you're in government, remember the governors are given immunity, meaning they can't be prosecuted. In return, in the same vein, you cannot be using your powers as a governor to be harassing and intimidating citizens and individuals.
Okay.
You cannot be using instruments of government, mobilizing them to intimidate them simply because they were critical. Dissent is not a crime. I can disagree with you. The Lagos state government, if they decide to spend 2 trillion, I can say, no, I don't like it. And because of that, I call them names. But the truth is, at best, they sue me for slander, not to hold me for terrorism.
Thank you very much.
Prince says calling someone repeatedly a cultist on social media can be charged under various sections of Cybercrime Act.
Actually, let me just highlight, Prince. Cybercrime is known as the use of computer as an instrument to further illegal ends, such as committing fraud, trafficking in child pornography and intellectual property, stealing identities, or violating privacy. I don't think calling names would fall under.
It's a computer crime.
Yes.
Because that's why it's cyber. Asho says from the DSS holding people against court orders to the governors arresting critical people to the artists and kidnapping and parading ladies for defamation. The abuse of power is everywhere and cannot continue without a backlash. It's a matter of time. Lulu says it's ironic that some of the people who are most critical of the GJ government in some of the harshest terms we've ever seen are the same ones who are now so sensitive to criticism to the point of attempting censorship.
All right, let's move on to our next story here. And the headline reads from the Punch newspaper: Positive identification, stop army operation. Reps NBA, that's the Nigerian Bar Association, and the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights, CDHR, tell Buhari. Now, just before I let you on this story, well, just to give, just to highlight some of the things to note about the military operation for positive identification, which is it's meant to hold across the nation during the last days of 2019. It started in October. During the operation, the Nigerian Army Women Corps will stage a robust show of force, confidence building patrols in some selected locations in Nigeria. The troops will operate mostly on the streets and highways. Nigerians are urged to maintain situational alertness and avoid night travels if possible. That's wear and carry an identity card always. So please tell us what the reactions from reps, NBA, CDHL.
Well, I mean, excuse me. Well, this started just of recent. There was an agency or an organization called BRICS that released an SMS alert or an alert that was sent around generally, and which has been making its way around all across. I saw it on social media yesterday as well. That starting from November 1st to December 23rd, that the military would be having an operation which is known by OPI. It's an Operation Positive Identification, whereby they'll be stopping citizens. Initially it was signaled that it will be starting across the northeastern states or so, but of recent now it's been making the rounds that is going to cut across the nation. And what that operation is all about is stopping people or stopping citizens and asking them for some form of identification to identify their citizenship. Now, this has been getting a lot of backlash and a lot of negative reactions from several quarters, from the National Assembly, from also the NBA, and also civil society groups. One of the civil society groups known as CDHR, that's the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights. And they're saying that this is in violation of our fundamental human rights, is in violation of the freedom of association and freedom of movement across the country. When we look at this, the military said that the reason for this is that they're trying to stem the movement and nip Boko Haram in the bud. When you're talking about nipping Boko Haram in the bud, and severally we've heard that Boko Haram has been technically defeated now. And it's coming to us as a surprise now that we're hearing that there's going to be a heavy military presence. That's what the circular that is
Mm.
making its round, saying that there will be a heavy military presence that will be conducting this exercise all across the country.
Yes.
Uh,
Actually, it's effective, they say, from 1st of November
yeah,
to the 23rd
yeah,
of
of
December.
December.
Mhm.
So they're saying that there will be a heavy military presence making the doing this operation, and the question is, when you we're having this in the country, it's actually suggesting that Boko Haram members and other bandits, because what they're saying is that this is supposed to nip other bandits such as castle rustlers, kidnappers, armed robbers in the bud. When we have this now, this is actually suggesting that these people who are the bandits do not have any form of identification that they
Mm.
carry about. They're Nigerians too. Let's not forget that these people are probably Nigerians
Yeah,
too.
many of
And
them.
they are like people like you and I. So they are most likely going to be carrying forms of IDs
And can dress
and can dress
responsibly.
responsibly. So this does not really nip that challenge in the bud. What the military should be looking out for is looking at better ways and better approaches of handling this situation, not by militarizing the country, because of course that is sending the wrong signals
All right.
to society
Thank
and
you.
is giving an indication that we are in a national emergency.
Thank
It's
you,
not sending
Bola.
the right signal.
Ada from Ikoyi says, good morning all. The business environment for businesses, especially FMCGs and medium-scale firms, the government government that. The government is the only one enjoying this consistent onslaught on the people's rights and freedom. They have so many low-hanging fruits they can address to make this place progressive. Excessive taxation, zero delivery on the basics, no budgets, no ideas. Even the land border closure is a massive problem too. Unfortunately, they're determined to take us back to the 80s. Social media is one of the only freedoms with which we pay for what we still have. We're not children of the administration, and we're not a tragic drama. Or are we? Please, oh, that's what Ada is lamenting about. Well said. JJ from Mushin says, good morning. Also, the government wants to regulate and prevent fake news and all. Well, what will happen when government itself gives information that is inaccurate because it wants to play or it wants things to play to its idea of progress? We're just going back to military days, is what JJ said.
All right, thank you for your comments. Please keep them coming through. We go to our next story from Premium Times. Federal government sets up interim committee to run the Niger Delta Development Commission. Divo, please take us through this.
Right. Okay. Recently, we did hear from the president himself during the budget presentation that some ministries and organizations would go through some review, which after he did declare that a forensic audit would be carried out on the NDDC because for all the money that had been given to them across the 16 years of existence, that not much was visible. So one of the first moves was also shifting the supervision of the NDC. Instead of directly under the presidency, it would now be under the management of the Niger Delta Ministry, of whom the former governor of Akwa Ibom, that Godswill Akpabio, is now heading. Now, he did release a circular recently stating that an interim management committee would be created. This constitutes of an acting managing director, acting ED projects, and acting director of finance and administration, and that they would create an enabling environment for the forensic audit. As usual, anytime an audit as such is to be taking place, some levels of management need to step aside so that there wouldn't be interference or compromise. Now, the audit is scoping the 18 years under microscopic lens. About 10 audit companies have been hired that will take on different aspects of it. One, what I expect is this, and I expect people to look at it, because probity starts from the house itself. We expect the accounts to be reviewed, okay? That's what's supposed to come from a forensic audit. Secondly, we expect them to produce the culprits, meaning those who have mismanaged the NDDC after this, because I think it's safe to say now, for all the billions that have been pumped in, we haven't really seen what we see on ground is not equal to billions of infrastructure and growth. Secondly, I need a prosecution. This effort, this forensic audit, should not be politicized, and this is where we make what do you call it, child's play of all the instruments that we use in government to be able to check corruption and bad governance. It goes on both sides. You cannot be threatening forensic audits, which nitpick the certain details of what has happened. And at the end of the day, it's either used to get some certain people in your favor or not. I expect, and I know many people have issues with God's will Akpabio being at the head of this being question with the EFCC. However, let us not forget the message. NDDC needs to come under the forensic lens, and they should complete the job. Take it to the last bit. Let's know those who were responsible and let them be prosecuted. And then they can shift the same lens on other ministries, departments, and agencies of government.
All right, thank you very much.
It was sent in this message from Ejigbo. He said, I do not have an issue with the military operation. I hope they won't carry it out with their guns and other stuff they use in fighting. Government should try and look into this. The military go around armed.
Exactly.
Bolaji, thank you for your message. We see that. Let's go very quickly to the next story because we're running out of time. This day newspaper has this report, Bolahon. Reduce operational costs. Buhari tells revenue agencies. He highlighted the need to cut costs, saying especially showing the fact that there's a serious mismatch between revenue targets and actual receipts, which is really harming the nation's annual fiscal plans. We look at the budget to see that the government, most of the agencies will find the receipts that they present, even within an agency or within a ministry, certain items do not match in terms of costs of procurement at different levels. This has been reiterated a lot of times. But how do you see this working out, especially coming from the Minister of Finance?
Well, I mean, just as you said, the Ministry of Finance, or that's the Minister of Finance, that's Mrs. Zainab Ahmed, did say this, that the government is planning to see how they can reduce the cost of a lot of the government agencies. That's the running cost, so that, of course, whatever they generate as revenue can go into the consolidated revenue funds account, which would help in boosting the government revenue. Just as you mentioned, we have a revenue crisis at hand. Most times we find out that we have a projection of generating X amount of money, but at the end of the year, when we look at how much we've generated from all the government agencies, we find out that we're generating far less, to the region or to the tune of about 50 to 60% of what we had projected in generating. So what the government is now doing is that they're giving instructions to a lot of all the revenue generating agencies, such as the CBN, the Nigerian Deposit Insurance Corporation, SEC, Nigerian Shippers Council, you have the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, and several other agencies, to look at ways at which they can reduce their cost. A lot of times you'll find out that most of all these government agencies generate huge amount of money, and at the end of the day, the returns that they make to the federal allocation account is far less than what they've generated. In some accounts, sometimes some even agencies are spending as much as 95% of what they're generating. So what the plan is now is to see how this cost to income can be reduced to about 60-40%, so that at least they're able to put more money into the government coffers, and then we would reduce our borrowing. It's a good move, but the implementation will be the problem. I would like to see how the government is going to implement on all of these, and because of course it requires a lot of monitoring, budget performances, and a lot of monitoring of the agencies anyway. But it's a good move.
It's nice to see that the government is looking inwards and starting from within.
They need
really to tackle this cost issue.
Or else we'll be in trouble many years down the line.
Yeah, not to sound alarmist.
We are already in
Yes,
trouble.
we are going to be. I mean, that's why the finance minister said last week, mentioned that we have a revenue problem, revenue generation
Absolutely.
problem. More than a debt problem.
Yeah.
The Punch newspaper has this next story though. Governors opposed bailouts, 162 million naira monthly repayment plan. The federal government had given funds or released funds to support the states, state governments to, be able to carry on their budgets and pay salaries. But they reduced the projection was for 20 years, the repayment plan. The CBN extended it to 30 years, but it seems like the state government thinks or does not feel that's enough time, that it should stretch it to more. Your thoughts on this, Devo?
Okay, let's re-headline this. States are broke. End of story. 35 states were given about 614 billion, okay? And now the federal government is recouping the loan. Now, in the repayment plan, the CBN did devise about 20-year repayments of about 252 million per month, of which the state government screamed. So they had already taken September and October. Now, Zainab Ahmed spoke on behalf of the CBN that they had revised that to now a 30-year span at 162 million. The state governors are still screaming. Now, she said, okay, well, let's take a look at it again. However, you see, the real issue here is this. This money was given to support salary, gratuity, and pensions, meaning they had to be given help to pay the basic. Now, if they're even screaming on the repayments, some state governments are still in debt, meaning they're still not even paying the arrears on gratuities, pensions, and salaries, even with help. So what does that tell you? There's a problem. Our states are in the red. The futures of our, and to continue, it means they will look for another source to be able to make up the payments of these people. What are we really doing? This is the talk about restructuring, whether the states need to be given more support or not, or how healthy of our states. The states are basically broke machines posing as healthy entities that cannot function.
But what do you do to broke machines that are not productive?
You fix them.
What happens when you run out of funds to fix them?
You cannot run out of funds, because at the end of the day, some things have got to give.
So I asked this question because we've been talking about this for several days. Yes. We have 36 states over the years, different times. Exactly, only 3 of them can really fund themselves. Lagos, River States, where Akwa Ibom, possibly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Trim down the cost of governance.
No, even if you don't trim down the cost of governance, 2 things once. If the federal government decides to pull its muscle on this indebtedness, they would say they're being high-handed and that they want to destroy the federation. However, the reverse of it is where we look back in the olden days, where the states capacity. So we're talking about the exclusive list and that revenue formula, whereby, because the state governors are saying that there's still money in the excess crude accounts, that this is available money for them. So at the end of the day, why keep muscling us down when you can spread the wealth a bit?
But when you run the country dry, what?
So the real issue, it's not even about the availability of funds or the debts. How well are the states being managed? How come with all the resources within each of the states, they're not able to create internal generated revenue? Some of these states, these 35 states, need to come for a 2-week class in Lagos State, sit down with the Lagos Civil Service and understand how internal generated revenue works.
Thank you. Well said. Our next story, 15 naira stamp duty is back in the news as research that the Guardian newspaper carried out and saw that a lot of people are actually complaining that the cashless society or cashless society drive that was championed by the CBN does not seem to be generating the desired result based on these new charges. There are a lot of charges that are lined up here. A few examples here. 4 naira for SMS alerts, unsolicited messages for birthday wishes, national and international day celebrations and operational updates. We'll talk about the 15 naira deduction on electronic transfer service. A lot more people have been seen across board making cash transfers or cash payments over just transferring, through POS machines and other devices like that. Your thoughts on this, Bilal?
Well, invariably, what this article is just saying is that Nigerian banking system is one of the most expensive banking system in the world. I mean, it's only in Nigeria that you get charged so much. You get charged mostly in Nigeria. You'll find out that a lot of all the other countries, or at least developed countries with proper banking systems, do not charge you.
Africa.
They don't charge you all these services that they're charging for. The Nigerian banks literally do not take any responsibility for anything. They pass on the entire cost of running the business onto the consumers. And so, many a times we're bearing the brunt of this. And that is what this article is talking about. The article is talking about the new introduction of the 50 naira. It's called stamp duty charges, according to the CBN. And this 50 naira stamp duty charges is being levied across anybody that uses the point of sales, POSs, to pay for any services across the nation. And this has now resulted in people now reverting to using cash instead of using the POS machines to pay for things. And of course, the complaint is that this is counterproductive. When the CBN is trying to promote the cashless policy, and then you start introducing policies that are counterproductive and that do not help the cause of you driving the cashless policies across board, it doesn't help the system. it's unfortunate that they've introduced this, and part of the reason why they've introduced it, there is still a lot of debate as to the reasons behind it. Is this just another charge that is being leveled by the CBN, or is this to help the merchants?
All right, thank you so much, Bolaon.
Fran from Lekki sends the message on WhatsApp, says military operation is just a way of paying us back for the election mistake we all made. If Boko Haram can afford military uniforms and armored tanks, tank carriers, is ID card their sponsors? Is it that the ID card that their sponsors can't do for them? Modupa says social media regulation in other countries actually puts the onus on the social media companies, e.g. Facebook and Twitter. There will always be attempts to muzzle critical voices. The onus is on citizens to push back. That's why we have public hearings for our bills.
Thank you so much. We have a number of comments around the social media headline, and I believe that's what we'll be taking during the 9 o'clock hour for Lagos Stock Signing 1. So for those whom we haven't been able to take their messages, please make sure you're tuned in at that time to air your views. Would love to hear them. But big thanks to our analysts for today. Thank you, Bolaon and Divo, for doing justice to the headlines. Bolaon is at Mr. G Quest on Twitter, and Divo is at Divo Okore on Twitter. Please stay tuned or stay with us here on Smooth 98.1 as we switch gears from news to sports. Still news, but this time to find out what's going on in the sporting world. Tega will be joining us for the Locker Room 981.
The headlines. The story.
Better be careful before they come and
I bet they're mad. They should come.
carry you and say
Yeah, feel like
hate speech,
they may
hate
come
speech.
first for you from the online.
They should.
Online
They're
what?
mad.
Online?
Do you know?
okay.
Do you
well,
know?
we didn't say anything here.
Do you know the funny
No, I
thing
mean,
is that
no,
with all our
exactly.
You said
lawyers,
they are mad. They should come for it.
with all our lawyers,
Yeah.
they keep reinterpreting the law.
Yeah. And no one is fighting back.
So
I think that's one of the
I cannot.
biggest things.
Those days we used to sing as children, sticks and stones can break my
Make a
bones.
move, yeah.
And then the government now says, I don't like what you called me. Are you for real? And then you slam terrorism. Do you know what it takes to even become a terrorist?
Abi?
It's
That's
an
what I'm saying,
achievement.
Yeah.
Is it that easy?
Is it
And
what?
it's an achievement
It's
now.
not.
It
No,
is.
it's not.
No, my point is when you
Negative achievement, you mean?
no. Hear
not
my
that easy,
point.
is what
Hear
you're
my
trying to
point
say.
is
Okay.
for someone to be called a terrorist, you've done
A
that
lot
is
of atrocities
people's
done now.
That's what I'm saying, yeah,
people's
it-
mouths will be
the-
aghast.
just
word-
open mouth
word-
as
that's
a-
why there was a comment that someone put that, oh, maybe it's because he's terrorizing the government. I'm like, you see, people don't now understand the meaning of what terrorism
Incitement is not terrorism.
Of course it's not.
Where it was even done when these people came up and said, yeah, Igbo people waka, did they do anything? Did
Yeah.
they flinch? And see his post though that your spaghetti flour. Is that what? Why are people not angry? That's your fellow press person. People should be angry now.
Of course we are.
is.
Ha!
They're angry now.
What
Are you
nonsense?
the government?
Small government. And you know the worst part? The youthful governors, they're the real terrorists. Ayade, the guy in Kogi State, what's his name?
Bello. Yeah,
Bello, 44 years.